We haven't always been here, but the neighborhood has. Even before it was a neighborhood on Earth, this one had always existed, a place for those who would be lost on cursed grounds, for those who would die long before their real life ever began, for those who never really wanted to go. We come from different times and different lives, but one thing remains true of us all: we all lived in the earthly realm of the neighborhood at some point, and we all died long before our time was supposed to come. We don't remember much of our lives in the cul-de-sac since the last member joined us, and we certainly don't remember when the next spirit will come. But here is what we do know. Rolf was the first to arrive. Like most of us, he was born in far-off lands and even in the afterlife hasn't lost touch with his old world upbringing. He lived on the land before it was developed, the son of a shepherd whose family came to start a farm on the grounds that would soon become the place we all reside. He died in 1903 while tending to the family's animals. A bull broke loose, and in his effort to stop the beast, he was trampled to death. That's why, though he brought many of his family's livestock with him in spirit, he chose not to bring the cattle. He continues his farm business daily but is more than happy to neglect it occasionally to play with the other children. Johnny was a lonely child, and Rolf became his first human friend ever when he came to the cul-de-sac after his death. His parents had moved to the grounds of Rolf's former farm not long after his passing. With no other children around and no field work to occupy him, Johnny retreated into his own mind, and from that private planet, an imaginary friend was born. Together they wandered the countryside, climbing trees and getting into trouble. Sadly, this didn't last forever. A few years later, Johnny became bedridden with illness, and in 1922, he died after a long battle with TB, seeing his imaginary friend Frank stand by him to the very last breath. Even now, without the countryside to play in, Johnny still wastes much of his time frolicking through the backyards and streets. Eddy was the next to come. Born in New York City, he moved to the neighborhood in 1932 just as the Great Depression was hitting full swing. The neighborhood, while still different, was beginning to take form from the fields of its past as families moved in and split up the lands that once belonged to the Rolf family. Always a schemer, Eddy looked for any way to bring comfort to his bare family life, even if it cost him the friendships of others. He died in 1939 after one of his grand plans to swindle a Sir backfired. He drowned crossing the local river while trying to run away from the angry kids he had tried to deceive. Even in the afterlife, he keeps chasing after the almighty dollar. Sarah and Ed came together not long after that. By the late 40s, the cul-de-sac had nearly taken its final form as one of the pre-planned developments popular in the post-war era. As brother and sister who grew up in the chaos of World War II, they found different ways to escape. Sarah, the daughter of a dead GI and a working mother, became enraged and controlling, trying to make sure everyone knew she was in charge in an attempt to cope with her view of her overworked mother. Ed, on the other hand, just shut it all out entirely. He shut out nearly everyone and everything, becoming what appeared to be a complete idiot, and chose instead to become completely involved in the monster movies and comic books that popped up after the war. It wasn't long after that, in 1953, when Ed and Sarah died in a car wreck as their mother was taking them to visit their grandparents. Naz came a time after the brother and sister. She was a flower child born to a pair of hippies turned establishment in the late 60s. A naturally beautiful girl, she always had a way with boys and men alike, living on a whim and often flirting and playing without any intentions. She died in possibly the most horrible way of any of the children in the neighborhood. In the summer of '79, a serial killer who had broken out of the local asylum slipped into her house in the dead of night and raped and killed her along with her entire family. In the trauma of these events, she, in a way similar to Ed, shut out the world entirely and forgot her parents and siblings. That's why in the afterlife she doesn't receive demands from non-existent parents, giving her much more time to lounge around and party as she often does. It didn't take too long before Double D joined the rest of the neighborhood. He was the child of two highly controlling professionals in the age of greed who, despite their constant absence, dominated his life. As such, he became quite intellectual and rather meek, a subservient figure. Always the curious type, he loved to experiment when given time away from school and his constant chores. This would lead to his untimely demise in 1986, as a gas leak combined with a Bunsen burner from one of his experiments blew him and his house to pieces. Between various misadventures, he continues to follow the written orders of his parents long after his death. Kevin was the next to join the group. He was born on the day of Double D's death and in many ways was his opposite. Kevin came from a broken home and developed a bold, cynical, and angry personality, taking it out on the other children. His abusive father rarely paid him any attention and would end up bringing about the end of it in a drunken rage. His father beat him after Kevin attempted to stand up to him, and he died on the way to the hospital in the winter of 1999. His father spent the rest of his life in prison. In the afterlife, Kevin changed his perception to the opposite of his real life, imagining a distant father who would shower him in gifts, though he maintained his boldness even in death. Jimmy was the last to come to the cul-de-sac. He died in 2000, not long after moving into the house Kevin's father had once lived in. He had had leukemia since he was barely old enough to walk and was always a very sickly child. Due to his overprotective parents, he never really got to be around the other children, living his days out in a small bedroom completely neglected by the outside world. Jimmy lingered for quite some time in a state of near death, but in the end, he finally caved into the suffering of his lifelong illness. The Canker sisters were different from the other denizens of the cul-de-sac. They were never of the earthly plane of existence. Instead, they are children of demons, not too dissimilar from the succubi of human lore, and they seem to possess abilities impossible by our standards, such as appearing nearly anywhere instantly. They were sent from hell to torment the already tortured souls of the neighborhood and are surprisingly attracted to the EDS for unknown reasons, although it is speculated that they are seen as the weakest world members and, therefore, easy targets. Despite that, they are universally loathed and often feared by everyone, including the EDS themselves. This response is AI generated, for reference only.